She called my dam inspections a jobs program for old engineers. FERC pulled the operating license within a week, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Tuesday afternoon, Preston Hayes' office, except it wasn't really an office. 3 months ago, it was the conference room next to mine. He'd had maintenance tear out the table and chairs his first week, put in a standing desk and a whiteboard covered in words like scalable and agile and overhead optimization. Glass walls so everyone could see him being strategic. The room still smelled like fresh paint and whatever cologne he bathed in before leaving his apartment. He was sitting behind the standing desk, which kind of defeats the purpose, but nobody was going to tell him that. An HR rep stood behind him holding a tablet, not making eye contact with me. She looked like she was watching someone back a truck toward a cliff. Clayton. Preston folded his hands on the desk, AirPods in as usual. I'd never once seen him without them. We've completed the strategic review of operations, and I want to be transparent with you about the direction we're going. I waited. Your position, Senior Dam Safety Director, is being restructured. Dam safety oversight is being transitioned to a consulting partner, Streamline Operations Group. It's a scalable approach, more agile, less overhead. The room was quiet. I could hear the HVAC system cycling. Somewhere down the hall, a printer was running. Is Streamline FERC certified? I asked. Preston blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. The HR rep shifted her weight. We're modernizing, Clayton. This isn't personal. I looked at him for a long moment. 29 years old, slim-fit suit jacket over a quarter-zip fleece like he was headed to a pitch meeting in Palo Alto instead of running safety operations for 12 hydroelectric dams. Haircut that cost more than what my dam technicians make in a day. Wharton MBA, graduated 14 months ago. Before that, 9 months at a boutique consulting firm in Marin County that installed solar panels on the rooftops of people who already had 3 Teslas in the garage. And he was eliminating the only FERC-recognized dam safety officer certification in the company. I nodded once, reached down to the chair beside me and picked up my hard hat. White FERC decal on the side. C. Read written in Sharpie on the brim, faded now, the letters thin and soft from years of sweat and rain and the UV light that bounces off spillway water on summer mornings. I'd carried that hard hat to every dam inspection, every emergency action plan review, every spillway certification across 12 facilities in 3 states. I understand, I said. I walked out, didn't look back. My name is Clayton Reed. I'm 54 years old. I spent 22 years in the United States Navy, Seabees, Naval Construction Battalion, enlisted at 18 builder rate. I poured concrete in Djibouti during the wet season when the ground turned to soup. I repaired airfield drainage systems in Afghanistan while wearing 60 pounds of gear and wondering if the next truck on the road was friendly. I built bridges in places where the nearest hospital was a Black Hawk right away and the nearest supply depot was a 3-day convoy. By the time I separated at 40, I held the rate of Petty Officer First Class, BU-1. I could read soil, water, and stress loads the way other people read a newspaper. I joined Cascade Energy Systems the day after my DD 214 was signed, walked in at 40 years old with calloused hands and a set of skills that don't come from a classroom. Started as a junior field inspector, worked every position between there and senior dam safety director. 14 years, 12 dams across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Every inspection report, my name, every emergency action plan, my name, every spillway certification filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, my signature on the line. I held the sole FERC-recognized Dam Safety Officer certification at Cascade Energy Systems. That's not a title someone gives you at a retreat. It's a federal credential required by law for every dam safety inspection, every emergency action plan update, every spillway operation across all 12 facilities. The certification requires documented experience, a federal examination, and site-specific qualification for each individual dam. You can't outsource it to a consulting firm that doesn't have it. You can't hire a replacement in a weekend. You can't fake it, buy it, or wish it into existence. 14 years of FERC filing reviews, 0 deficiencies, not one. Preston Hayes didn't know what FERC stood for. Let me tell you what 14 years inside a dam looks like. The Cascade Falls facility was our crown jewel, the largest of the 12. When you walked into the internal gallery, the first thing you noticed wasn't something you saw, it was something you felt. A deep hum, low and constant, that started in your sternum and settled into your teeth. The turbines, 200 tons of spinning steel, converting the weight of a river into electricity for 600,000 homes, the sound never stopped. It was there when I arrived at 6 a.m. and there when I left after dark. The tunnels inside the dam structure smelled like river water and old concrete and rust inhibitor, a metallic sweetness that coated the back of your throat. Cold, always cold inside a dam, even in August, even when it was 92 degrees on the surface, you wore layers. You carried a flashlight even though there were overheads because the overheads were original 1960s fixtures and they flickered when the turbine load shifted. I knew which expansion joints at Cascade Falls needed watching every spring when snow melt increased the hydrostatic load. I knew which intake gates at the Pine Ridge Dam in Idaho ran hot in August and needed manual cooling. I knew that the emergency spillway channel at Lost Creek hadn't been cleared since 1998 because I was the one who cleared it in 2003, waist deep in debris with 2 technicians and a chainsaw, writing up the maintenance report by flashlight in the back of my truck while the mist off the spillway soaked through my jacket. I walked every inch of those structures every year for 14 years. And here's what it cost me. My son Jason is 29. He's an environmental engineer at Pacific Environmental Solutions in Portland. He's smart, methodical, got his degree from Oregon State and earned it. Logging hours in the field while I was already 200 miles away, checking spillway tolerances before a storm system rolled in. His sophomore year, he called me from a job site, excited about some water quality project he was working on. I was at the Pine Ridge Dam. Emergency spillway inspection. Flash flood warning. I told him I'd call him back. Never did. That was 4 years ago. Linda, my wife, works as a school nurse at a middle school in Troutdale. The woman who moved twice for the Navy and once more when Cascade reassigned me to the regional office and never once complained where it counted. Linda, who kept the house together through Djibouti and Afghanistan and dam inspections that bled into weekends and holidays in the evening of our anniversary, 3 years running. She never asked me to quit. She just kept the porch light on and made sure Jason knew his father loved him, even when his truck wasn't in the driveway. And Cascade Energy Systems, a $1.1 billion utility generating 28% of the region's renewable energy, decided that the man who kept all 12 of their dams in federal compliance for 14 years was overhead to be optimized. Preston Hayes arrived at Cascade 3 months before he fired me. Nephew of CEO Barbara Hayes, Wharton MBA. His entire career in energy consisted of 9 months at a boutique consulting firm in Marin County that put solar panels on rich people's houses. He walked into a hydroelectric utility and didn't know what a penstock was. I know this because Roy Fisher, my senior dam technician, 15 years under me at Cascade Falls, former Army Combat Engineer, 3rd Infantry Division, told me that Preston asked him during a facility walkthrough if the penstock was some kind of legacy system we could phase out. A penstock is a pipe that carries water to the turbines. It's the reason the dam generates electricity. That's who they replaced me with. After the firing, Preston sent a company-wide email. I heard about it from Roy before I'd even made it home, excited to announce a major step in our modernization journey. We've transitioned dam safety oversight to Streamline Operations Group, a best-in-class consulting partner. This position's cascaded for a leaner, more agile future. Next-gen clean energy best-in-class. He'd outsourced federally mandated dam safety to a firm that didn't hold a single FERC-recognized dam safety officer credential, and he put a hashtag on it. That evening, Roy sent me something else. He'd found an email chain on the shared drive, Preston to Barbara, dated 2 weeks before my termination. Preston wrote, "The dam safety officer position is a holdover from the 90s. We can outsource this for a fraction of the cost." Barbara's reply was one line. Agreed. Clayton's inspections have always been a jobs program for old engineers. Proceed. I read it sitting in my truck in the driveway, engine off. The sky was that Pacific gray the Northwest does when it can't commit to rain but won't give you sun either. Linda's kitchen light was on through the front windows. I could see the warm yellow of it reflecting in the wet pavement, a jobs program for old engineers, 14 years, 0 deficiencies, 12 dams, 3 states. Every inspection, every emergency plan, every spillway certification. 14 years of crawling through tunnels and driving mountain passes and keeping the lights on for 600,000 homes. A jobs program. I set the phone face down on the console. Something clicked. Not anger, not hurt, just clarity. The kind you get when the noise finally stops and you can hear the river. The morning after the firing, my phone rang at 6:47 a.m. I was already up, old habit. 14 years of 5 a.m. departures don't just switch off because someone in a quarter-zip fleece tells you you're restructured. I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee. Not the Stanley thermos, just a mug from the cabinet. The house was quiet. Linda had already left for work. Jason was still asleep in his old room. He'd been staying with us for the past month while his apartment lease transferred. The caller ID said Howard Banks. Howard was Senior Vice President of Operations at Northwest Power Alliance, Cascade's largest competitor. We'd known each other for 12 years. Served together on the Pacific Northwest Dam Safety Council, shared coffee at every annual FERC Western Region conference since I started attending. He'd tried to recruit me 3 times over the past decade. The first time I told him I was loyal to Cascade. The second time I told him my pension was vesting. The third time, about 2 years ago, I told him I appreciated the offer, but I wasn't ready to leave. He wasn't calling to make small talk. Clayton, tell me it's not true. It's true. A pause. I could hear him exhale through his nose. Then his voice shifted, not sympathetic, exactly, strategic. Howard was never sentimental about talent. He was precise about it. Clayton, FERC can't certify a single spillway operation without a qualified dam safety officer on record. Cascade just eliminated the only one in 3 states. Another pause. Call me when you're ready to come home. I didn't call back for 3 days. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in 14 years. I stayed home. The first morning, I didn't know what to do with my hands. I tightened the kitchen faucet that had been dripping since March. I reorganized the toolbox in the garage, the personal one, not the one bolted to the truck bed. Hank followed me room to room, his nails clicking on the hardwood, confused by the change in routine. He kept looking at the door like he expected me to grab my keys. The second morning, I drove up to the Cascade Falls overlook. The pull-off on the Forest Service road above the dam, my spot. No cell signal, just the sound of water moving through the gorge below and the wind in the Douglas fir. I could see the spillway from there, the mist rising off it like steam. I sat in the truck for an hour, didn't turn the engine on, just watched the river do what rivers do. The third afternoon, Jason came home from work early. He's been doing some consulting work for environmental impact assessments on regional infrastructure projects. He walked in through the garage door, work boots still dusty, hard hat under one arm, laptop bag over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw me at the kitchen table. You're home before dark, that's new. Figuring some things out. He nodded, set his gear down, opened the fridge, pulled out a beer. Dad, I heard what happened. From Roy's kid, Preston Hayes is an idiot, smart like his mother, but he said something else that made me look up from my coffee. You know, we've been contracted to do environmental impact assessments on some of Cascade's dam facilities. If they're not maintaining proper safety protocols during operations, he let it hang there, took a sip of his beer. The state environmental agency takes that stuff seriously. Real seriously. That evening, after Jason went upstairs to work on some project reports and Linda was grading health assessments at the dining room table, I went out to the truck, sat in the driver's seat with the dome light on, pulled up Howard Banks's number. I looked at the phone for about a minute. Then I looked at the ghost of the Cascade logo on the driver's side door, the outline still faintly visible where the decals had been. Lighter paint where the sun hadn't reached for 11 years. I called Howard. Northwest Power Alliance's offer arrived in writing within 48 hours. Vice President of Dam Operations. $18 million compensation package. Salary, equity, signing bonus, 5-year guarantee. They weren't offering me a job. They were acquiring a capability. My FERC credentials, my 14 years of inspection history across every major dam in the Pacific Northwest, my institutional knowledge of the 12 facilities I'd just been removed from, facilities that their largest competitor could no longer legally operate. I signed at Howard's office in Portland, Oregon, 10 days after Preston Hayes told me my position had been restructured. Howard's corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Columbia River, wide and gray and unhurried. I could see the mountains through the haze. I signed with the same plain steel body pen I'd used to sign 14 years of inspection reports. Nothing ceremonial about it, just ink on paper. Welcome home, Clayton. I nodded, set the pen down. Across the river, Cascade Energy Systems had no idea what was about to happen. 5 business days after my termination, FERC's Portland Regional Office ran a routine filing review, the same kind of review I used to prepare for. The same calendar I'd maintained for over a decade, flagged, color-coded, filed 90 days in advance. The filing review was supposed to be a formality. It had been a formality every quarter for 14 years because I made sure of it. This time the review flagged something. Cascade's dam safety officer of record me had been terminated. No qualified replacement had been filed. The FERC reviewer called Cascade his regulatory compliance office. Compliance didn't know what to tell them. Nobody in compliance had been informed that I was gone. They transferred the call to Preston Hayes' office. Preston didn't take the call. He was in a meeting about rebranding the company website. The call bounced to Patricia Ward, Cascade's general counsel. Patricia was sharp, 52 years old, had been with Cascade for 18 years, and understood regulatory exposure the way I understood expansion joints. She didn't panic easily. She pulled the Streamline Operations outsourcing contract that Preston had signed. She read it once, then she read it again, slower. Then she picked up the FERC notification letter that had arrived by certified mail that morning, the one that had been sitting in Preston's inbox, unopened, while he picked fonts for the new website. Patricia walked into Barbara Hayes' office. Preston was there, sitting in one of the leather chairs, legs crossed, AirPods in, scrolling his phone. Barbara was behind her desk. Patricia held up the outsourcing contract in one hand and the FERC letter in the other. Preston, did anyone verify that Streamline has FERC recognized Dam Safety Officer certification? The room went quiet. Preston looked up from his phone, blinked, silence, because FERC just called, and they don't. Barbara Hayes' face didn't move at first, then it did. A slow drain of color that started at her jawline and worked up. The kind of change you only see when someone realizes the mistake isn't fixable. Patricia set both documents on Barbara's desk. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. We have 12 operating dams without a qualified dam safety officer of record. As of this morning, we are in federal non-compliance. FERC can suspend our operating licenses pending recertification, and recertification requires a qualified dam safety officer, which we no longer employ. Preston pulled one AirPod out, so we hire one. Patricia looked at him the way you look at someone who asks why the dam needs water. There are 6 people in the western United States with this qualification. 3 work for competitors. 1 is retired. 1 works for the federal government and can't take private employment. She paused. The 6th is Clayton Reed, who you fired 11 days ago, 7 days after my termination. FERC issued emergency orders suspending operations at all 12 Cascaded Energy Systems dams pending recertification with a qualified dam safety officer. Non-negotiable federal law. No expedited appeals process that works faster than the 14-month recertification timeline. The cascade started immediately. Day 1, all 12 dams went offline. Turbines that had been spinning continuously for decades wound down to silence. 28% of the region's renewable energy capacity vanished from the grid overnight. 600,000 homes just gone. Day 2, wholesale electricity prices spiked 340%. Utilities across Oregon, Washington, and Idaho scrambled for replacement power from natural gas and coal plants. It was August, heat wave. Air conditioners running at peak load. The grid operators were pulling power from as far away as Nevada and Arizona to fill the gap. Ratepayers saw it on their bills within the billing cycle. Day 3. 3 state utility commissions, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, opened formal investigations into Cascade's dam safety compliance. Subpoenas issued. Documents requested. The words public safety appeared in 3 separate press releases. Day 5, Cascade stock crashed 45%. $890 million in market value. Gone. Evaporated like mist off a spillway, except mist comes back. This wasn't coming back. Day 7, Preston Hayes' company-wide email, the one about the modernization journey and the best-in-class consulting partner, was screenshotted and circulated on every industry news site and energy trade publication in the country. Side by side with the FERC enforcement action. The headline on Utility Week wrote itself. Cascade Energy VP outsources dam safety to uncertified firm. FERC shuts down all 12 facilities. The hashtag was still there. Next-gen clean energy sitting right next to a federal enforcement order. Preston tried to hire a replacement dam safety officer. He discovered what Patricia had already told him. 6 qualified people in the western United States. 3 already employed by competitors who weren't about to let them go. 1 retired. Roy told me later that Cascade called him and the man laughed so hard he had to put the phone down. 1 in a federal role, legally prohibited from private employment. And the 6th was me sitting in my new office at Northwest Power Alliance, looking out at the river, drinking coffee from my Stanley thermos, the one with the dented lid and the chipped green paint, the one I'd carried to dam inspections for 14 years and through 2 deployments before that. The 14-month clock started ticking, and it wasn't going to tick any faster because a 29-year-old with a Wharton MBA wanted it to. 2 weeks after the suspension, I received a call from FERC's Western Regional Director. Not unusual, I'd worked with FERC for over a decade. They knew me. They trusted my inspection record. They asked for my expert assessment of Cascade's facilities, not as a former employee. As the most qualified dam safety officer in the region who had 14 years of site-specific knowledge of every one of those 12 dams, I gave them an honest assessment. Thorough technical, based on over a decade of inspections, maintenance logs, and internal reports. The same reports I'd been filing every quarter. The reports that flagged deferred maintenance on intake gate seals at Pine Ridge, erosion monitoring at Lost Creek, structural reinforcement needed at 3 of the older facilities, the reports that Preston never read, the reports that Barbara apparently considered part of a jobs program. My recommendation to FERC, $85 million in structural upgrades required before reactivation, based on deferred maintenance I'd been documenting for years. Every dollar justified by inspection data that had my name on it, FERC adopted the conditions. And Cascade Energy Systems, a $1.1 billion company that had called my work a jobs program for old engineers, was now staring down 14 months of zero hydroelectric revenue, $85 million in mandatory upgrades, a 45% stock collapse, 3 state investigations, and a market that smelled blood. Northwest Power Alliance was the largest utility in the Pacific Northwest, and they had just hired the only man who knew how to restart those dams. The phone calls from Cascade's board started coming within the week. Not to me, to Howard Banks, asking if Northwest might be interested in acquiring certain assets. Howard looked across his desk at me when the first call came. They want to sell. I set my coffee down. The Stanley thermos left a ring of condensation on his desk. They don't have a choice. Cascade couldn't survive 14 months of zero hydroelectric revenue. That was the math, and math doesn't negotiate. Patricia Ward presented the financial projections to Cascade's board in an emergency session 6 weeks after the FERC suspension. I wasn't in the room, but Roy Fisher was still at Cascade then, and he told me what it looked like. Patricia stood at the front of the conference table with a single slide on the projector. No graphics, no charts, just numbers. 12 dams offline. Them megawatt hours generated, revenue from hydroelectric operations, which accounted for 68% of Cascade's total, was a flat line. Debt service on the dam infrastructure continued regardless. The $85 million in structural upgrades mandated by FERC before any reactivation made the restart timeline not just long, but economically devastating. The 3 state utility commissions, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, were threatening to revoke operating agreements entirely if compliance wasn't restored within their own timelines, which were shorter than FERC's. Cascade's stock was still falling. Institutional investors were exiting positions. The bond rating agencies had the company on review for downgrade. Patricia's summary was one sentence: we cannot service our debt without dam revenue, and we cannot generate dam revenue without a dam safety officer we don't have. Barbara Hayes sat at the head of the table. She was 61 years old. She'd built Cascade Energy Systems into a $1 billion utility over 25 years. She wasn't stupid. She'd made one mistake, a blind spot the size of a dam for family, and it had cracked the foundation of everything she'd built. She fired Preston that afternoon in her office. Not the glass-walled room he'd built for himself out of a conference room. Her office, the one with the original Cascade logo on the wall and the framed photo of the Cascade Falls groundbreaking ceremony from 1996. Roy said she didn't give a speech. She said, "You're done. Get out." Preston argued. Said this wasn't fair. Said the consulting firm had assured him they could handle it. Said he was going to call his mother. Barbara looked at him the way Patricia had looked at him 3 weeks earlier. The way you look at someone who asks why the dam needs water, your mother is why we're in this mess. I should have said no. Preston's security badge was deactivated before he reached the elevator. His Tesla was still plugged into the employee EV station he'd had installed his first week. Security had to ask him to unplug it before he left the garage, but firing Preston didn't fix anything. It was like pulling the match out of a building that was already burning. The dams were still dark. FERC didn't care about personnel changes. FERC cared about compliance. A qualified dam safety officer of record, site-specific recertification for all 12 facilities, and $85 million in structural upgrades completed and verified before a single turbine could spin again. The 14-month clock kept ticking. Cascade's board began entertaining acquisition offers. They didn't have leverage, and everyone in the industry knew it. A utility with suspended operating licenses, hemorrhaging cash under investigation by 3 state commissions, with no qualified dam safety officer, and no realistic path to getting one before the money ran out. That's not a negotiating position. That's a fire sale. Northwest Power Alliance made an offer for 8 of Cascade's 12 dams, the 8 largest facilities, including Cascade Falls. The offer was at a 71% discount to assessed value. Cascade's board voted to accept, unanimous, not because they wanted to, because the alternative was bankruptcy. And bankruptcy would mean all 12 dams going to auction where they'd sell for even less. The signing took place at Northwest Power Alliance headquarters in Portland. 4th floor, corner conference room, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the Columbia River, wide and gray and patient. The way it had been for 10,000 years before anyone put a dam on it, and would be for 10,000 years after every dam was dust. I was on the buyer side of the table. Howard Banks next to me. Northwest's legal team had the documents stacked and tabbed. 8 acquisition agreements, one for each dam, plus regulatory transfer filings and FERC notification paperwork. Neat. Organized the way I'd have done it. Across the table, Cascade's attorneys both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else, and Barbara Hayes. She didn't look at me when she sat down. I didn't expect her to. There was nothing performative about this moment. No speeches, no accusations, no settling of scores. Just paperwork and signatures and the sound of the river outside the glass, Barbara signed first. Quick, mechanical, the way you sign something when you've already done the grieving and just want it over with. Her pen moved across 8 sets of documents without pausing. She set the pen down and folded her hands in her lap. The document slid across the table. I picked up my pen. Plain steel body, nothing special. The same kind I'd used to sign inspection reports for 14 years. FERC filings, emergency action plans, spillway certifications. I'd signed thousands of documents with pens exactly like this one. They were the kind you buy in a 10-pack at the office supply store. The kind that works every time because there's nothing fancy about it to break. I looked at the first document, Cascade Falls Hydroelectric Facility. The dam I'd walked through 1,000 times, the dam where the turbine hum settled into your teeth. These were my dams. They always were. I signed each document. 8 dams. 8 facilities I'd protected for over a decade. The spillways I'd inspected in the rain. The tunnels I'd crawled through in the dark. They were mine to protect again. Now, just under a different logo. I didn't say anything to Barbara. She didn't say anything to me. She stood, collected her copies, and walked out. Her attorneys followed. The conference room door closed with a soft click. Howard looked at me. Didn't say anything for a moment then. You good? I'm good. That was enough. The aftermath played out over the following months. Northwest Power Alliance's dam portfolio increased by 57%. I oversaw the recertification and reactivation of all 8 acquired dams personally. Site-specific qualification reviews, structural upgrades, FERC inspection schedules rebuilt from the ground up. We completed reactivation in 11 months, 3 months ahead of FERC's minimum timeline. 0 deficiencies. Cascade retained 4 dams, but couldn't operate them until recertification was complete with a new dam safety officer. That process took the full 14 months and cost them the $85 million in structural upgrades. By the time their remaining dams came back online, they'd lost market share they would never recover. Preston Hayes' name appeared in the FERC enforcement record as the executive who outsourced federally mandated dam safety oversight to an uncertified vendor. The record is permanent. It's public. It will come up in every background check, every job application, every Google search for the rest of his career. His Wharton MBA couldn't buy his way out of a federal regulatory file. Roy Fisher resigned from Cascade 3 weeks after the acquisition and joined Northwest under me as senior dam technician at the Cascade Falls facility. He brought 2 other technicians with him. Men who'd worked under me for years and weren't interested in working for anyone else. I got home late the evening of the signing, later than I'd meant to. The paperwork took hours. By the time I pulled the F-250 into the driveway, the sky was clear. Actually clear. No Pacific gray, no clouds threatening to commit, stars visible through the kitchen window. The kind of Northwest evening you get maybe 20 times a year when the air smells like Douglas fir instead of rain, and the mountains are dark outlines against a sky that hasn't forgotten how to be blue. The porch light was on. Linda always left the porch light on. I walked in through the garage door, hung my jacket on the hook. Linda was on the couch reading some paperback she'd picked up at the school book fair. Hank lifted his head from the floor, ears forward, tail thumping once against the rug. His muzzle was grayer than it used to be. He put his head back down when he confirmed it was me, satisfied. Linda looked up over her reading glasses. So you signed it? I signed it. She nodded, held my eyes for a moment, the way she does when she's reading something deeper than what I said. 24 years of marriage. She didn't need me to explain what the day had felt like. She already knew. She set her book down on the cushion beside her. Jason called. His environmental consulting firm got the monitoring contract for the dam reactivation project. He'll be working directly with you on the compliance assessments. I sat down next to her. The couch creaked the way it always does on my side, the spring that's been soft for 3 years that I keep saying I'll fix. Hank shuffled over and put his head on my boot. Warm weight, steady breathing. That's good, I said. I meant it. For the first time in 14 years, nothing was going to stop me from being where I needed to be. No flash flood warnings, no emergency spillway inspections, no 6-day work weeks and 2-lane highways into mountain passes while my family waited at home. My hands were still, first time in weeks, maybe months. I hadn't realized how much they'd been moving, adjusting, tightening, turning things over until they stopped. The house was quiet. Linda picked her book back up. Hank's breathing slowed through the kitchen window. Stars Barbara Hayes retired 8 months later. She didn't give a public statement. The board named an interim CEO and operations person, someone who'd actually run a dam before, too late to matter. 6 months after the acquisition, Jason and I were working together on the environmental compliance review for the Cascade Falls reactivation. He was explaining some new water quality monitoring protocols while we stood on the observation deck overlooking the spillway. The mist was catching the afternoon light, and for a moment I could see both the 29-year-old environmental engineer and the kid who used to ask me how the turbines worked. "Dad," he said, not looking away from his tablet, "I'm glad you're doing this. The infrastructure work, it matters." I adjusted my hard hat strap. Same white hard hat, same FERC decal, same faded C read written in Sharpie on the brim. "Yeah," I said, "it does." Funny thing about dams, nobody thinks about them until they stop holding the water back. Then everyone remembers who built them. If you've ever been told your years of experience were just overhead to be optimized, you know how this feels. The system doesn't always work the way it should, but sometimes, just sometimes, competence wins out over credentials, and the people who actually know how to do the work end up exactly where they belong. The infrastructure that keeps this country running was built by people who knew what they were doing, not by people who could talk about it in a conference room. And when push comes to shove, expertise still matters more than a business degree and a quarter-zip fleece.